The modern Western world is justifiably proud of products and services which have resulted from rational philosophy and the practical effects of the scientific method. From the abolition of slavery to the life-saving properties of antibiotics, we can be thankful for the benefits of the unfettered flow of ideas which, when put into fruitful debate with one another, deliver magnificent results. An essential element of these contests of ideas is the principle of the freedom of expression or freedom of speech. In the modern day West, we assign more authority to the outcomes of these contests and rather less to older authorities such as church, scriptures, aristocracy, and a multitude of vested interests. To offer appropriate challenges to the status quo, we must assume that we are free to express our own opinions in what John Stuart Mill referred to as a marketplace of ideas. This is an essential component of the way to acquire reliable knowledge. Though the West has prospered philosophically and scientifically and commercially by using this marketplace, we are now increasingly being confronted by the public expression of opinions which, intentionally or not, offend cultural or moral or religious sentiments. To review the New Zealand approach to such conflicts, today I'm pleased to be in conversation with David Rutherford, who was appointed Chief Human Rights Commissioner in September 2011. Welcome to St Andrews, David. David, briefly, what is the role of the Human Rights Commission?
Well, it's twofold. Well, one is to promote and protect human rights in New Zealand. And that in New Zealand bit's quite an important bit because we're often asked to comment on all sorts of foreign affairs matters which are not in our mandate at all. And the other is to promote harmonious relations in New Zealand.
You're the Chief Commissioner, but there are 7 others. What do they do?
Well, what they do is determined in 2 ways. One, either by the statute, so we have 2 commissioners whose role is partly determined by the statute, the Race Relations Commissioner and the Equal Opportunities Commissioner. But in addition to that, we're a Crown entity, an independent Crown entity. So the board of the Commission sets the strategic direction, and the Chief Commissioner then allocates portfolios, sort of like the Prime Minister does for Cabinet Ministers. So, for example, there's no Commissioner for Women's Rights in New Zealand, but the Jackie Blue is designated by the Chief Commissioner to be the Commissioner for Women's Rights.
Would it be fair to say that what the Human Rights Commission is trying to do is to bridge the cultural and racial divides that we find in any kind of society, and you're trying to provide bridges of communication across them?
We certainly are doing that, but I think also we're trying to educate people in what the fundamental human rights that we're talking about are, and also ensure that people's human dignity is respected.
Is it right then to say that human rights go with being human? They're part of the territory. We don't earn these rights and we can't lose them. But people can deny them.
People can deny them, and people can disrespect people's human dignity. Yes. I think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 2 international covenants talk a lot about dignity before they talk about rights, and it's probably a failing of our New Zealand Bill of Rights, that it doesn't start with a statement, say like the German Constitution, that the dignity of every person in Germany is inviolate, and it is the duty of the German state and every German citizen to uphold the dignity of anyone.
But we don't have an equivalent to that. Could it be that in some cultures like ours, the state takes on the role of defining and monitoring rights, but in other states, and I'm suggesting a Sharia-based society, the established religion does that? So there are different organs that define.
Well, under international human rights law, the states that ratify the international conventions...
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Because not all have ratified it.
Not all have ratified it, but most have. Yes. And when they ratify it, they take on the primary duty in international law to protect the human rights of everyone. And that's... it's actually interesting, just this week, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, has opened his first speech at the Human Rights Council by saying states should not be defined by the grand diplomacy. He's actually attacking the audience really, but by how they protect the dignity of rights of people in their state.
And one of the rights, the one that's on our agenda for today, is that of free expression. Free expression has got a lot of stick recently because of certain things that have happened overseas. But before we go on to that, there are some good free speech things, aren't there? Like whistleblowers and exposing fraud and stirring the pot of social and political ideas. So even in a political context, free speech is valuable.
Yeah. And you know, one of the American universities did a study on what differentiates countries where they've signed up to all these conventions, which, you know, even North Korea has, from countries where actually there's a higher realisation of rights. And the distinguishing difference, and they only looked at women's rights, was stroppy women's civil society organisations. So civil society, strong civil society, is actually the most critical defender of and realiser of human rights.
The functions of satire and lampooning, somebody once said, is to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted. That's a nice phrase. That's some sort of balancing up rights and opinions in society.
Yeah, I mean that's one view, but it can go a bit far sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how would you recast that?
Oh no, well I think the thing to me that I think defines New Zealand as one of the very few countries, so we have a very high threshold of respect for freedom of expression, but we also have a very strong sense of thinking about what we're going to say or express before we say it. And I think those two, so we get the balance right better. And that's not about state censorship, that's about tolerance.
Tolerance. And we do, even in a rough and tumble kind of way, still respect our politicians, even though we lampoon them. I mean, Tom Scott could get shot 3 times a week in many countries.
Yeah. Oh yeah, well I mean, the cartoon you saw yesterday,
yes,
wouldn't have appeared in Singapore, I can assure you.
Earlier I recited the benefits that we've gained from freedom of expression. This is all very grand, but New Zealand law places limits on free speeches. Now let me just get article number 1 here, which summarises the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990, and it draws on the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says everyone has the right to freedom of expression, including the right to seek, receive and impart information and opinion of any kind in any form. But there are limits to this, and there was a legal opinion that said it would not be in society's interest to allow freedom of expression to become a license irresponsibly to ignore or discount other rights and freedoms. So under New Zealand law, freedom of expression is not absolute, it's kind of conditioned by other things.
Yep, that's right, and that's been the case even before we had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So laws like defamation, censorship laws, laws to protect children, all sorts of different laws have limited free speech all over the world. Political speech, though, has been defended, at a higher threshold.
Yeah. But absolute freedom of speech would result in chaos.
Yeah, just like the nowhere in the idea of liberty and freedom is that it is the liberty to do what you like. That's actually tyranny, and in fact, if you think about it, that's what we were fighting against in World War II.
Voltaire has been quoted, I think misquoted, that he says, "I disagree with everything you say, but I defend to the death your right to say it." That's nice and gorgeous, but it doesn't work, surely.
I think, I think it does work in the sense. I mean, one of the interesting things that people don't understand about World War II is that in 1942 we signed a Declaration of the United Nations before there was a United Nations organisation. We did that with 27 other countries, and largely it was based around firstly Roosevelt's 4 freedoms speech in 41, where the 4 freedoms he talked about were freedom of speech, freedom of belief, freedom from fear and freedom from want. Those found their way into the Atlantic Charter and then into this declaration, and those countries literally said, in a way, what Voltaire said: we are going to fight to the death for freedom of speech. And I just remember a couple of years ago Fred Allen, who was a All Black coach, died, and just before he died, he actually came out and said, we didn't go over there for fun, and it wasn't an adventure, but we did go over there to fight for freedom of speech. So I think those soldiers did know.
The classic conversation closer in this matter is, you defend the right for me to stand up in a crowded cinema and shout fire. That surely has got to be something that nobody anywhere would justify, unless of course there was a fire. Yeah. So is it also fair to say that no nation offers full freedom of speech and that none should?
Yeah, it probably is. Some nations have higher thresholds than us and some have lower. I'd like to think we've got the balance fairly well right, but there are things, even in our defamation law, for example, that chill free speech. We've had a very hard look at the harmful digital communications bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, which is incredibly well intended, but done wrongly could chill free speech.
Are you free to speculate on the article that turned up in this morning's newspaper about the lady who got $168,000 for the what her ex-employer did?
Well, that was a privacy matter. So that was which in in New Zealand the Human Rights Commission isn't your only human rights protector. Yes. You've got the Independent Police Conduct Authority in terms of police. You've got the Ombudsman in terms of prisons, and you have the Privacy Commissioner. So that case was a case where the Privacy Commissioner held there had been an interference in privacy. And I think the big thing in that case is that is by far the biggest award that the Human Rights Tribunal has given, and hopefully might be a precursor of a few others in the human rights space as well.
Yes. Was it that the young lady made a mistake in putting it up on Facebook in the first place, even though it was in a private part of Facebook?
Well, there is no private part. I mean, I think that one of the things I'm constantly trying to tell young people in particular, but any audience really, is the biggest threat to your freedom in the digital world is you. Not the security services and not business, but for young people, they put all their lives up on Facebook and Snapchat and all these things, and they don't seem to realise that actually they've just published it. They've just published their life.
And so the fact that it was her own personal set of friends that it was directed to, that doesn't allow her to say, it was stolen and...
Well, it's been found to be a breach of her privacy, what happened. But what I'm saying in terms of, and she doesn't deserve what happened to her. But the reality is that, the world we live in today, even from the world I was brought up in, where the chances of anything getting in the paper about me were slim to zero, what kids put on Facebook reaches a bigger audience than the Dominion Post every day. So it's terrifying, really.
Just changing something rather abruptly, the Federation of Islamic Associations of New Zealand, this was back in January, wrote that they have unequivocally condemned the recent shooting in Paris. But later on, Dr. Anwar Ghani, who's the president of that organisation, said, at the same time, we question whether the open season for free speech is really as absolute and unrestricted as is claimed. Following on from the killings, the arrests in France for hate speech suggest that there are still taboos, subjects that Western society is protective towards, abuse which we will not tolerate, and lines that cannot be crossed. For the sake of mutual respect and peace, we all desire a fully objective examination of such lines. Seems a very reasonable thing to ask for.
So that's in the context of, and it's important probably that people understand there are differences in different parts of the world. So there are much stricter limitations on some sorts of speech in Europe. Holocaust denial is one, relating to obviously the...
So you can't send a letter to the editor saying, I reckon the Holocaust was not as bad.
I'm not sure exactly what the limits of it are, but certainly people have been prosecuted for anti-Semitism, and for Holocaust denial in France.
But that runs against what we take to be the Western rough and tumble of ideas, that by contesting the status quo and the received realities and the received pieties.
So, I think the situation here is the press in general are pretty responsible about what they publish. I think how we deal with the things that Anwar is concerned about are very real. I mean, we have had in the last 12 months Jewish children attacked in the streets of Auckland for wearing the yarmulke, and we have had Muslim children attacked in the streets as well for wearing the hijab. So, the question is, how do we deal with that?
Under the freedom of expression rubric, these things are expressions, are they? Burqas and the Christian cross and gang patches and lapel badges and lurid t-shirts, they're all expressions. Now there's some pretty grotty t-shirts out there which perhaps common decency would say ought not be on show, but we've got no way to rein them in, or?
Well, we've set some very high standards in New Zealand, or thresholds. So, one of the more recent cases is the case of the burning of a New Zealand flag at an Anzac ceremony, which the Supreme Court held to be protected by the New Zealand Bill of Rights. Now, under any thing that I've ever thought about, that would be one of the more offensive places that you could take that particular form of expression, but there are also reasons why you might do it there.
The nearest we might have to national religion might be the Anzac Day observance.
Yeah,
it's one that all members of society can participate in and have great value for, without regard to their own particular group that they...
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting issue, the remembrance around Anzac Day. I would certainly like to see us asking ourselves much more often, why not just remember them, but also remember what they fought for, and make sure that we're as committed in our way today as to living up to those values in our country. And it's very interesting. I last year spoke with the Australian head of army in Australia on an Anzac Day speech, and I think they're genuinely concerned over there about how overhyped it has become. And they actually look at us with our largely community-based, less rah-rah sort of way of doing it and think, yeah, that's about right. So we don't want to get too carried away with all this. I mean, they're offering spray-on Anzac poppy essence for your umbrella over in Australia these days. It's just nuts.
But in New Zealand, the Human Rights Commission either sets limits to behaviour or expression, and suggests limits also.
We don't set. I think one of the really important things to understand about the Commission is that 10 years ago, any adjudicative function was taken away in favour of mediation and alternative dispute resolution. And that has been an undoubted success. 90% of the complaints that come to the Commission are resolved to the satisfaction of both parties in confidential alternative dispute resolution processes. And it's quite a number of other countries envy that thing. So we don't do, that's the Human Rights Tribunal that you mentioned before, is the adjudicative body.
Some people, and for example Dame Anne Salmond recently wrote that she sees constraints on opinions and constraints on expression of those opinions as bullying. Do you feel that there is an attitude of bullying in the community?
I think we're a bit precious on that. I mean, we've got to remember my main civil society background is working with people with intellectual disability. And I think some of us who are, people like me and others who speak in public, frankly need to toughen up like Special Olympics athletes about that. We shouldn't, we do get attacked. It's almost inevitable when you stand up to authority that they'll, as the Prime Minister said last year to me, pull your socks up. But that is our job, and we should keep doing it. And there is an issue in New Zealand. Probably the biggest human rights issue in New Zealand is violence and abuse. Sexual violence and abuse, family violence and abuse. If you think about all the noise that we've currently got about terrorism, and you consider that one child will die every 5 weeks in New Zealand, 90% of the time at the hands of a family member or a person known to them. This issue around a culture that tolerates violence and abuse is a big issue for us. We're clearly not going to legislate it out of the law because it's illegal already. So it's actually up to us to stand up and do something.
And getting back to the free speech thing, there are people who have defended, in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo massacre, have defended free speech in terms of, I have a right to offend you.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I think that's where the tricky, I mean, in all countries, that's where the tricky balancing happens. You clearly cannot have a free society in which is free from offence.
Because some of it will be accidental, won't it?
Well, some of it may be deliberate, you know, I mean, and remember too that a lot of these freedoms are designed for the minority to be able to express their opinion over the majority view, over the status quo. Yes. So, you know, and it's true that even in New Zealand, in the area of racial discrimination, the biggest complainers about racial discrimination in New Zealand are, and who do you think you'd fill in? Who do you think are the biggest complainers about racial discrimination in New Zealand? By some considerable margin, Pākehā.
Yeah. And how do they express, how do they identify the discrimination?
Well, usually they describe it in terms of Maori privilege.
Oh, okay.
You know, which is reasonably hard for me to see when I look at the figures of disadvantage in New Zealand.
The Charlie Hebdo retaliation is the most recent example of some group objecting and retaliating. Can we say it's understandable that they should object, but the matter of the retaliation was excessive? Can we make that distinction?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say
they have a right to object.
It goes back to that whole point about they were free to object, but it goes back to violence and abuse. There is no excuse anywhere, whether it's in your home or your school or in Paris, for someone to kill someone because they disagree with you. That's the line in the sand.
Well, there was also a lot of comment that the people who did this come from a society which is already marginalised. They live in France. In fact, many of them are French citizens, but they feel marginalised and isolated from the society at large, mainly because of their faith, sometimes because of what they're wearing. And so they've already got a massive chip on their shoulder anyway, and this came along and tipped them over.
Well, I think the thing that we've got to be careful of there is not to play into the terrorist narrative that sort of says we are the speakers of the true Christianity or the true Islam, or in the Irish example that I know more about, the Protestant versus the Catholic. The enemies of liberty have always been people who are too certain they are right, and so certain they are right that they believe they have the ability to kill someone.
One commentator compared the French response, Je suis Charlie, to Je suis KKK in our society. We would not identify with the Ku Klux Klan in the way that much of French society, much of Western society identified with the Charlie Hebdo. So already there was a problem, and almost as though the way the French people responded made it worse, perhaps.
I don't know. I mean, I think
there's no reconciliation available.
Well, yeah, but I think the bigger problem is it probably has A.G. Grayling, who's a British professor of philosophy, put it. He calls about the freedoms we're talking about here: freedom of expression, association, belief, and privacy. He calls them the fragile freedoms, the freedoms that are most at threat in the Western democracies. And I think actually Charlie Hebdo was a wake-up call. So we are giving up these freedoms, which are fundamental. I mean, if you think about this church, this religion would not exist without freedom of belief and freedom of expression. And Luther began that journey, and others followed. So in the West, we're giving that up in the name of safety. I mean, you think about the proportionality. You don't hear people just saying, what are we talking about a terrorist threat that our government says is low, compared to if we were going to apply the same standards to child abuse, would we have cameras in every home? If we were going to provide the same standards to road safety, would we have cameras in every car? You know, let's be proportionate. And in the words of my uncle, don't let them own you, because of the fear they engender in you, because that's actually what their intention is.
You remember back in 1998 the controversy around the Virgin and a condom piece of it was presented as a work of art. Many, especially Catholics, were deeply offended by it, in a way much like the Muslims were offended over the Danish cartoons that mocked Islam. But the Bill of Rights Act 1990 saw no reason to censure the people who did that.
That's right. So that, you know, and I think that sort of highlights one of the real challenges for us, because ultimately our freedom and our liberty and our ability to be ourselves, whether it's Muslim, Christian or Jew, is not protected by the Constitution or the law, but only protected by how we behave towards each other in society. So, you know, you can have all the laws you like, and you know, the Soviet Constitution was remarkably similar to America.
So I have no legal redress if somebody offends deeply something that I deeply respect.
Well, the threshold, I've got to be careful that this matter is actually before the courts at the moment. There's a case before the courts at the moment in relation to the cartoons that were in the Marlborough Express and the Christchurch Press about beneficiaries, and the allegation is that they were portraying Maori and Pacific Islanders as beneficiaries and insulting them, and that we should have acted in relation to that. And that case will actually help decide what that threshold is in New Zealand. So there are, if violence was likely to ensue, or sort of public disorder from something like that, that is the limit in New Zealand at the moment.
So we're not looking to a time when we would legislate for respect for religion. Salman Rushdie is reported as saying that respect for religion is the same as fear of religion. That's a pretty terse way of putting it. But more generally, don't we respect or hallow anything that ought to be ring-fenced or protected?
Well, the difficulty is who decides what. And in general, that's the majority. And that's what human rights is designed to stop happening.
So we are really in the business of trying to balance individual freedoms against sectarian sensitivities, perhaps? Because I think you know, in the in the International Bill of Rights, so the Universal Declaration and the two conventions, you not only have the right to be I, to determine yourself who you are, but you also have rights to be a community of people. So, and to believe in religion or not. So it's not as simple as you know, one or the other. It's both. And how do you get? I mean, it's really, in one sense, the Universal Declaration is an agreement by the nations of the world of the basic moral standards by which we will govern ourselves. So race hatred, I think, is one that's proscribed, isn't it? That you may not promote race hatred.
It is, but you know, I mean, one of the sadder things about that, and particularly about the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, is that in 1967 it deliberately excluded Jews from the definition of race in order to get the agreement of other countries to actually have it. Now that was superseded very quickly after. But you know, and again the High Commissioner for Human Rights really, in his speech, I think it was this morning if it wasn't yesterday, is really calling on the nations of the world to get over some of that sort of blinkered ideology that gets in the way of them actually living the values of the Universal Declaration.
So perhaps we should be a little more relaxed in our edginess about a lot of these issues. Tolerant.
Not, you know, we cannot tolerate Jewish children or Muslim children being abused in our streets for being Jewish or Muslim. But who's going to not tolerate it? Are we going to run to the police? Are we going to run to the government? No. We who are beside those people when we see it happen have to stop it.
So the overall title of this conversation is how free is free speech? On a 1 to 10 scale, how free is it?
Well, in the sense of the legal construct in New Zealand, very free. But I believe it is that because of the other side of that coin, which is tolerance. Okay. You know, I mean, in some countries they do have laws with much lower threshold around hate speech, and what has happened in those countries, and really what led to some of the changes in our Act 10 years ago, is the trivialisation of human rights. So suddenly a government organisation, even if it's an independent one like the Commission, becomes the speech police. And you know, that reality that in fact the majority complain more about racial discrimination than...
Yeah, is there a special case in regard to Maori and particularly Terrace that the treaty gives them rights which can be abrogated by careless free speech anyway?
Like what?
Well, just by criticising. You may say that the settlements, for instance, the treaty settlements are excessive, and form an opinion about that. Right.
Yeah, I think my view really is the greatest problem with the treaty and the settlement process is our overall ignorance of our own history.
Yes.
You know, I always talk about us having fought a civil war, and some people actually wonder what the hell I'm talking about, but I'm a South Taranaki boy, and I know exactly what went on, and you know, and I was lucky enough to learn about it, but I didn't learn about it in school, even though I was in the heart of that place, and I didn't learn about it when I did New Zealand history at Victoria in the 1970s, when I was in the same tute as James Bellich, but some progress has been made since because of people like him. You know, but I just heard the other day about a couple who had gone down on an exploration of the island of Island Bay and had their whole history explained to them. You know, and I think if we could learn more as New Zealanders about the place we live and the history of that place, we'd be amazed, I think, and we might understand why, you know, paying someone 2 to 3% of what they lost 150 years later is a pretty good deal for society on one side, at least for the majority.
So in summary, we're having to bring it to an end of it now. So what, tolerance, knowledge, just be a little kinder to each other.
Be braver and kinder. So be braver, stand up when you see something that you believe is wrong happening to someone that demeans their dignity, and be kinder. You know.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Conversation.